I have to get my morning voice ready. Anyways, welcome to day 2 of the Sustainable Finance Forum. Of course, lots of interesting discussions yesterday and building on even more today. My name is Leah Soroka, and I'm from IFC, leading climate and agriculture finance in the region. And I have the great pleasure of moderating today's event. The theme of today's panel is financing renewable energy projects and the impact or their bankability in the region, in the ECA region. So in this session, we are going to hear from a really diverse, esteemed panel. Matti from Finance in Motion, Bella from ANIF, Magnus from Emergy, and Altenay from Triodos. And we are going to hear their perspectives on renewable energy and renewable energy financing in the ECA region. So what I'm going to do is to kickstart this panel. We have 45 minutes here. We will give each speaker about 10 minutes to address their perspectives. And then we will come into questions, debate, comments. So as Shushan has mentioned, please enter your comments and questions, and we will try and make this a very interactive session. So to the panel, I'd like to propose to them the following. From your organization's point of view, what are your renewable finance updates? What are some of the cool, innovative things you've been doing in the ECA region? And what has been your observation of the risks and the ease of bankability of these projects? And have you been using any innovations such as syndicated financing or other types of interesting structures in financing renewable energy in the ECA region? So first of all, I'd like to turn it over to Bella. Maybe Bella, you could start and give us your point of views. I ask each speaker to keep their section to just under 10 minutes, and then we will go into questions and answers and discussion.
Sure.
Over to you,
Bella. I will briefly introduce to you my organization, Armenian National Interests Fund, or ANIF. ANIF is a fully government-owned investment fund. It was created in 2019 with a mandate to co-invest, participate in large-scale infrastructure projects that are of strategic importance for the country. And investing in sustainable energy was one of our priorities since our establishment. An example of our projects is indeed our collaboration with Masdar, Abu Dhabi Future Energy Company, for a 200 megawatt solar project in Armenia. So with more than, in average, 300 sunny days during the year, Armenia has a notable solar energy potential. However, at the moment, latter provides only a fraction of power generation. The Armenian government has set an ambitious target aiming to increase the share of solar power generation to at least 15% by 2030. And our joint project with Masdar, IGWAN, utility scale solar project, is an important step towards achieving this goal. I'll also briefly talk about the steps that we took in order to start implementing the project. So in 2019, Armenian government announced an international tender for each stage of the project, a 200 megawatt project. And later in 2021, Masdar was announced as the winning bidder in the tender process, offering a final tariff price of 2.90 cents per kilowatt hour. This project is developed on a design, finance, build, own and operate basis, and ANIF has a 15% ownership in the project. This is a total of $174 million of investment to implement this project, and we're currently in the environmental impact assessment process. Again, we believe that this project is a major step for the country towards diversifying the energy mix and towards minimizing the carbon footprint. And we believe that this is a mutually beneficial partnership. It's an economically viable project and a strategic and important milestone for the country in terms of becoming more sustainable.
Excellent, Bella. I just wanted to ask you a couple of things. You talked about 2019 is when you started to initiate the tender and deciding in 2021. Is this is something like that takes a long time when you're doing the first big project, or do you have any advice after doing it once how you can accelerate the process? Or do you feel that this is par for the course in large renewable energy projects? Just some thoughts on that.
So Armenia is working towards improving its legislation on private-public partnership projects, and it was in 2019, end of 2019, when the legislation was adopted that we have to go through an international tender process for a large infrastructure project. So before that, there was no formal process, like the legislation did not imply this process. And what we did is being the first format who used this process, and we did this with an internationally recognized best practices, which of course takes time, but I think with the time, the processes will be streamlined and will use probably less time to figure out who the winner is. But we're proud that we went through the process and we have a winning bidder.
Okay, excellent. And what is the timeline now that you're doing the environmental impact assessment? When do you think you will have like first, if I can call it, shovel in the ground, and then intended operations? If you could just give us some point of view.
Of course. Right now we're working towards the financial, towards identifying the financial sides, the financial structure of the project. We are talking to different international financial institutions about the project, and we will start the construction process in 2023. This will probably be the fourth quarter of next year.
Okay, excellent. And then after construction, operations are anticipated for when?
Next year. I'm sorry, the construction process will take 2 years.
Okay.
And we will have a 20-year government support agreement for the project.
Okay, excellent. Is there anything you'd like to add on this very exciting initiative? And I think you have a lot of lessons to share on how to initiate, the enabling environment that has to be in place in a country in order to foster, global tenders, best prices, best ideas coming forward. So we'll come back to you for any other questions in this regard. Anything else you'd like to add, Bella, before we'll go to Magnus?
I think this will be it. I would just mention that the government support has been very, very significant and important in order to be able to take the best practices to our country.
Okay, so this is obviously an example of sort of public-private, international, everyone coming together to realize a sustainable, renewable energy initiative, particularly at this large scale. Magnus, over to you. From Emergy, what are your experiences with respect to financing renewable energy in the region, and some of your struggles, some of your innovations in order to make this a reality? Over to you, Magnus.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet. I just wrapped up the annual Win Europe conference here in Bilbao and off to next. So it's a week of conferences. So that's very interesting. And also very interesting to see how the mood is in Europe, which, I mean, we are partly linked to Europe here and also further east on this conference. But I think there's a lot of synergies here. So very first, I'm part of a Nordic wind developer or renewables now. We have developed and built around 400 megawatts, including the award-winning Sivage project in Ukraine, 250 megawatts. Matti's team is one of the lenders to that. We are in total 8 European DFIs, which made it an award-winning project. I think it's almost unheard of to have so many financiers behind one project. But that was what was needed to build such a large project in Ukraine. And during the last couple of years, we basically shot out into Southeast Europe. We're focusing on that region, especially right now, and I think it's a very nice spot to be. We see, especially now following the war, that there's some proper disruptions happening. And I think the key words I would say is really you have volume, price, and policy, which are like for me key bullets right now. You see tremendous increases in expected volumes that is coming from policy push in Europe. There is, for example, the European Commission published their repower strategy, where they expect now that renewables in Europe need to increase by 3 times, which I don't know how realistic it is, because one of the reasons why I mentioned policy is that also at the conference here, I could see one main theme, and that was almost everyone complaining about slow permitting, the inability of quickly ramping up these investments. So private sector seems very keen to do the work, but remains to be seen if they are allowed to do the work. And I think also what is very critical is price, because you've had, due to the war now, tremendous price hikes. And as before, I mean, for example, IFC, BRD, and others, they've been working very hard on convincing governments around the world that renewables is really the most competitive resource. And now it speaks for itself. I mean, the price levels in the markets are really high. Renewables do not, in general, need any subsidies anymore, and they will actually provide governments with gains. This project in Armenia is a great example. I mean, comparing 2-3 euro cents to what you see in price levels in Europe, it's a bargain. And hopefully that will continue to help renewables expansions in all of the region. And I think we have now a portfolio of around 2 gigawatts, which we are focusing on maturing from development and gradually into construction over the next 5 years, or even less, maybe, because of all these ambitious targets. And I think also what is interesting to see is that part of the reason why I think it's possible to increase growth is the industrial consumers have really woken up. They are getting tired of paying really big bills. And so they are coming to stakeholders like us to see if they can we can help them decarbonize, basically. So there's a huge decarbonization process in the industrial space around the world. And we can even see it at the conference here in Bilbao. So, I mean, there are plenty of struggles, obviously, trying to build projects in countries like Ukraine. But at the same time, these are also the markets that present the most exciting opportunities. We have a large project in Ukraine that we started to construct, but had to put on a pause, due to the war as well. And that we hope to. It's currently behind enemy territory, as we might call it, but we hope and in a way, well, let's say also expect that things will at some point revert to normality, and this green European wave will just flush into Ukraine as well. And then we will be ready to try to revitalize these projects, which would be, if we're able to build the whole project, will be one of the largest in Europe.
Wow,
I
that's
think,
quite impressive.
yeah, it's we set high targets and then we try to reach.
Yes. Well, and this is something that Bella mentioned, and yourself, Magnus, is that, you need to have some leadership. And sometimes they call it the moonshot, that we're going to the moon. And I think, number one, it's a leadership that you have to have some goals and direction, right? The leadership is also supported by, let's say, policy statements. Like you mentioned, policy is very important to set the direction. I think we do see things like the price volatility right now of fossil fuels and energy. If you look at Ukraine, for example, which obviously you have been very attentive to, Ukraine imports, probably 70 to 80% of, gasoline and diesel. So all these approaches that will look to renewable energy become important. The pricing, it becomes important. And I think this is kind of a convergent topic leading to decarbonization, as you mentioned, because if we can come in with cheaper electricity, right, as the base, as the cheap electricity across the board, you really stimulate green transportation, connections to distributed grids, and all types of other, if you can call it structural reform in this space, right? So if there ever is a time to bring attention to go to renewables with the price, with much clearer directions, with targets being set for carbon emissions, for for businesses as well as for nations, I think that this could be the moment. You sort of get this inflection point in the change in the market when all of a sudden people say, yes, this is the time. We have to go forward and make the leap. Thank you very much, Magnus, for that. And we'll come back to some questions to you. I'd like to go to Matti now. So Matti, if you can give us a bit of an overview on from Finance in Motion, and then we'll go to Altenay, because I know Altenay has a very nice presentation for us, and I just wanted to make sure that we get to that spot where she can present without interruption. So Matti, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Leah. And good morning. Hello to everyone. It's a pleasure to meet you, pleasure to be invited to be part of this. And so my name is Matti. I'm working for Finance in Motion. It's an impact asset manager, and we manage 5 different funds that invest in these themes of green and be it renewables, be it sustainable agriculture, and so on. And my key focus is really on renewables and project finance, and that's under the Green for Growth Fund. And the Green for Growth Fund is active in Eastern Europe and also going into the Caucasus region and down to North Africa and the Middle East. So we're active in that sort of broader region beyond Eastern Europe, also south and further to the east. And thanks so much as well, Magnus and Bella, for the earlier comments. I think definitely, Bella, it's exciting to see that the project with Mastar and Armenian National Interest Fund is moving forward, and it's bringing really a lighthouse project to the country, following also this Masaryk 1 project that was done earlier. So that's tremendously exciting. And Magnus, amazing job on Sivash bringing that together. And we've been happy to be a part of it. And I think that's also one of the benefits of syndicated financings, to be in the projects together for the learnings, for risk sharing and all of that. But maybe over to sort of what we've seen over the past year or so. I think it's definitely been an eventful year, and I'd like to break it down into sort of 3 things: the good, the bad, and the ugly. And starting with the positives, I think there's definitely a stronger drive for renewables, especially in the Eastern European countries that we see. And I think it's enabled by the still attractive cost of generation. Definitely agree with Magnus that the prices have really shot up over the past year, but if you still compare to 2, 3, 4 years ago, we're still at attractive pricing. And then coupling that with the sort of electricity prices that we're seeing at the moment, this equation on the whole still can be attractive in projects. And that's, we've seen at least, is motivating sponsors and developers to develop more projects and push those forwards. And I think another theme is that we're seeing still a little bit of this backlog development from the COVID lockdowns. I think every country is different. Every country had different waves that impacted in, labor force availability. Can you construct? Can you not? So I think that's something that we see coming back. And I think lastly, on the positive, sort of the interest in renewables has really been supported by concerns over security of supply and energy independence. I mean, it's really matters to most countries, and it's been unfortunately made more relevant by the war that we have at the moment. So that's sort of the positive still in terms of the motivations for renewables. I think the sort of moving over to the bad, I think there are headwinds definitely from the higher cost of new solar and wind generation, and that's really been caused by these large increases in commodity prices from steel to whatever raw material you're looking at, also to supply chains, fuels, and so on, to transport heavy equipment over long distances. And also the availability of solar panels we've seen has been a challenge, and also to an extent turbines. It's harder at this moment just to make an order and make sure that it comes in the next month. There's definitely more competition for those production slots. And I think one thing we're seeing in the past months is also the sort of increasing interest rates, the base rates that have been going up, more so in North America, but I think it's also creeping into Europe and sort of the euro-denominated areas. And I think that's just something where you need to just manage the risks carefully. And I think that leaves us then with from the good, the bad, and the ugly. The ugly, unfortunately, that's really the war on Ukraine. It's heartbreaking, beyond the human loss and suffering. It also has brought increased uncertainty and risk into some of the region. And another side then of really the higher market prices for electricity is that beyond motivating renewables, I think the negative side of it is that it is also attracting more thermal power generation from coal and oil. And if you build these assets, they're there for the next few decades. They're not going to be built for the next 5 years. They really will be on the ground for the next decades. And that's something we're not too excited about. So I think those are that's the high level, I guess, themes that I think we're seeing. I mean, beyond that, I think there's really corporate PPAs that I think we're seeing is a bigger trend also. I think it's really in the Balkans as an example case. I think the landscape for renewables has really changed. There used to be fixed feed-in tariffs. You have a long-term contract. You have a fixed contract for whatever cents or euros per megawatt hour, and that's really starting to make way for the corporate PPAs and elements of merchant exposure. And I think the implications of this for developers and financiers, I think, are really profound from both corporate PPAs and this sort of market integration and merchant integration. And I think the positive elements are definitely on the higher price side, that motivates more generation. But at the same time, it's something that's new to the region, new to some of the financiers, and that increases sort of the scrutiny around it. But I think at the same time, there is a strong push, like Magnus referred earlier to the policy side, by the EU energy policy, looking at the Energy Community Treaty in the EU, and they're really pushing for these fully integrated, properly functioning markets that result in affordable energy prices. So I think that's definitely the case. And I think if you look at corporate PPAs, there are still so many different shapes and forms that can take. I mean, if it's back again to the example of industrial clients that Magnus said, these can be sort of physical inside the fence PPAs where the direct consumption by the industrial client happens really on the site. Or you can move to, say, sleeved or virtual PPAs where there's a utility in between the generator and the buyer, and that handles then the transfer of energy and the funds via transmission line. And then lastly, also financial hedges, which is really where the generator just sells on the open market, but secures the long-term price with a trader. So I think that can also really take different shapes and forms. And maybe coming from there to the bankability side, just brief comment on that is that I think there's a lot of focus on sort of the price and the tenor and the guarantees behind these contracts. But I think in our view, it's also important to take a broader view on bankability and just look at really the entire power purchase agreement, or the, is the contract, and see what are the other provisions, how are we dealing with force majeure, how are we dealing with change in law, limitations of liabilities on either side, termination, and so on. So it's really the whole package that matters at the end of the day.
Matti,
so I
can I
think
ask you a question?
Sure.
Is a lot of your work is in, like you mentioned, Eastern Europe and Africa, Middle East. I'm just wondering, the uncertainty of what's going on with war, with uncertainty if things how they will progress into other regions. I see that you're addressing a lot of these risks. Are these lessons learned applicable even in the more developed markets? And are you seeing lessons learned as you're being forced into this, like force majeure, how we're going to deal with different types of liabilities, influencing your investments, let's say, in the same space in Africa and Middle East? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a good question. I think to an extent, the countries and the regions are to an extent isolated. So it's hard to say that what's happening in one country will definitely have an impact in the other. But I think the other side of that is that a lot of the financiers and developers are, a similar group of people that are looking at the same group of countries. So if there's sort of a very remote risk that you don't think about happening, and then suddenly it happens, I think it, kind of becomes a bigger scrutiny item than when you're looking at something in the next countries. And I mean, just as an example,
Yeah.
then you might be a bit more keen to really focus on the insurance and the details of that.
Of the risk mitigation. I'm just wondering also, do these current events, are they impacting the size of projects? Are people looking at more, of the modular scale to diversify risk of the installation? Or is it still really on economies of scale, going to larger renewable energy initiatives?
I think, at least from our side, we haven't really seen a direct impact from the recent events, but I think we do see a broader scale in terms of, the smaller projects happening, medium scale and larger scale. And I think from our side, we're happy to support at all levels. If it's a smaller project, I think the challenge is how do you make it bankable, since the cost of project financing can be quite high. You need to do due diligence on, ENS side, on the technical side, and so on, and those costs.
Yeah, the costs of any project, whether they're big or small or large, right? And this is what Bella was sort of describing, right? The procedures that are required. So it makes the smaller projects a little bit more difficult. Would you say, and this is a question I want to take to everyone, so you can just keep it up after Altanai, is, are we seeing that what we are learning, like we have in, Magnus was saying, to have 8 DFIs involved in one project, syndication creates benefits of learning, they create benefits of risk sharing. Are we seeing the ability to bring project scale lower, that we can make more affordable, smaller projects or not? So that's something I would like you all to consider. Matti, do you have any other points before we go to Altanai? And then we can take it back to these cross-cutting questions amongst all the panelists.
Sure. Maybe just quickly on the small projects. I mean, from our side, what our fund has the ability to do is that we have a separate technical assistance facility and the direct financing, and also we support financial institutions. And when we look at financing a project, what we can do is determine, do we support the bank in the country that then finances the project when it's on the smaller side, and for example, the project is a bit on the closer to the client, then the bank can really understand the financing better and can finance it. If it's, say, in the 10 megawatt in upscale, what we can do is finance it directly as the fund ourselves, but support it with technical assistance. That's a form of grant or donor funding where we support certain upfront costs such as ENS due diligence and other areas that really bring the project to the higher international standards, which is one of our aims, but at the same time making sure those smaller projects that are less bankable happen.
Okay, thank you for that, Matti. Yeah, very interesting learnings here on the process, the investment time, sharing the lessons learned and the risks. Altenay, over to you, because I know you have a bit of a presentation from Triodos, so I will turn it over to you, and I think Ripsime is going to help us with the presentation. Is that right? Over to you, Altenay. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Leah. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. It's very nice to be here. I would like to also thank the organizers for this very interesting and indeed a very useful forum to discuss what is happening right now. So I just have some slides in order, because I wanted to mention a little bit about Triodos. I believe that many of you know already our organization, but just for those of you who don't, Triodos Group, I work at Triodos Investment Management, and this is an asset manager. It's a full subsidiary of Triodos Bank, and Triodos Bank is not the biggest bank in the Netherlands, but it is a niche player, but it is a leading sustainable bank. So actually the bank itself was organized after Chernobyl catastrophe many years ago in 1987, and being sort of dark green and promoting the renewables is in the DNA of Triodos. So what we are doing is here you can see that we have quite a history. And what is also, I think, notable and interesting is that both Triodos Bank and Triodos Investment Management, the bank is very active in the Netherlands. So what we have is quite a big group of colleagues who are working with renewables in the Netherlands and doing all kinds of exciting projects, such as, you name it, even Giga Rhino, huge battery, and the normal renewables and offshore winds, all that stuff. And of course, Triodos Investment Management, the asset manager where I work, we do mostly emerging market investments. So this just gives you sort of an idea that we are, among the biggest names in this business. We do we do act as an arranger in many transactions. Let's go to the next slide in order not to take too much time. So my main points today would be the following. So once this horrible catastrophic war has started, several days later we saw that there was an IPCC report, and this report, of course, it's sort of compared to war, everyone was so much looking at what is happening and the developments, but we also, as professionals in the renewable energy, we noticed that this IPCC report is also quite compelling. It talks about, us needing to phase out fossil fuels. As Leah also mentioned before, it talks about decarbonization. It talks about all those things that need to be done. And pretty much also the way we read this report and the way we understood it is that it is time to act now. Otherwise, the planet might get warmer by more than 3 degrees or even up to 3 degrees, and then it will be sort of irreversible. So this is what is very critical. And also what we see in parallel in the Netherlands is that many of the mainstream players, like ING, for instance, they said we will not finance new oil and gas projects. So these developments we think are very relevant in the current context. And as also Matthew was mentioning before, what we are seeing with this war is, okay, there might be some kind of return to coal, but we at Triodos, we say, okay, we need to look at it. The organizations like ours, DFIs, everyone who can, we need to really try to do something and plan our actions in such a way that we still try to uphold the renewables agenda. So it might sound, of course, kind of idealistic, but we think it's really very, very crucial. Let's go to the next slide, please. And so going back to our organizations, well, we are active, and the team where I come from, our focus is actually global. We do renewable energy projects in different countries, and that includes not just the utility scale projects, even though utility scale project is our main type of activity, but we also have some C&I lately. Also, Leah, to your question about small projects, one of my colleagues has done a very exciting deal in Africa called PowerGen. It's about mini grids. It's quite small. So what we do see that in many countries, in the places where infrastructure is not well developed, the small projects and mini grids are a good solution. And we do see that there is a lot of potential for that, especially in some certain geographic areas of the world. Going back, we are also in our team, we are very excited to develop new things. For instance, here you see on the map in Kyrgyzstan, we are cooperating with Biolic Finance, and this is a green loan to financial institution, meaning to say that Biolic is our client and they issue microcredits to the vulnerable people for energy efficiency, for renovating their houses in a proper energy efficient way, and we are the ones providing financing for that. So these are sort of the segments in which we go beyond to the normal traditional stuff. And also yesterday during the forum, we discussed a lot about sustainability bonds. These are very interesting for us as well. We think that is also, when you have a proper framework, as was emphasized by many speakers yesterday, when you have a proper framework, it's a very good instrument. Now, I would like also to mention, without going too much into detail, we do finance a solar station in Ukraine. It is in the western part of the country. What I would like to emphasize is the amazing fact that there is a war going on. We all know how horrible it is. At the same time, that client is still paying to us. They are still paying. They are still making sure they are still making sure that we receive everything as a lender. So and this just shows I would say, the amazing attitude from their side. And of course, we all, let's say, we all have hopes that this will somehow be resolved. Okay, and now also, Leah, you were mentioning about instruments which we have. So what we do is a lot of these syndicated loans. We do it usually with partners. And some of our loans are AB loans, some of them, but besides AB loans with, say, large DFIs, we also have parallel loans. And so we usually, when we take risks, we like to do it with the partners. Please go to the next slide. So yes, and I wanted to show, this is one of our very good projects. It's the Vorotan hydro cascade in Armenia. It's very, very big. There are 3 cascades, in fact. And usually we like to finance new construction, including, all the capex costs and so on. But this was an exception, because this was a refurbishment, a major refurbishment of a plant that existed even in the Soviet times. But for Armenia, it is pretty important. It covers a very large chunk of the market. It is situated closer to the border with Iran. And this is one of the projects that is done by a Contour Global, a very respectable sponsor. And the way we look at Vorotan is it is in line with best international practices. It's a very exciting, very interesting investment. So, and this is definitely one of the larger ones, because it's 404 megawatts. But we do both large and medium and smaller size deals. And now let me talk a little bit about the risks that I see. Indeed, both Magnus and Matti have also mentioned a lot of very relevant things, what we see nowadays. I don't want to repeat everything, but I think I also echo our concerns about pricing, how it is going to go. Because when I mentioned that in the Netherlands, the renewables are going very well, we all know that in the Netherlands, the offshore wind does not need subsidies anymore. So it has become also a very good way of financing. Now we are very concerned what will happen with tariffs, what will happen with the PPAs, especially in the emerging countries. So I think we need to see that. Another thing that I'd like to add from our side, we see also FX risks. We see FX risks not only, of course, not only in relation to the renewable energy, but also in relation to the financial institutions. And here I want to also mention that in Triodos we have other teams which invest in the financial institutions, including the ECA region. So what else is one of the big aftermath of the current situation is how will the SMEs, how will the businesses be able to continue existing with the supply chains that have become much more expensive. So we definitely see, certain causes for, to be concerned. And I think I have mentioned pretty much most of the points that I wanted to go over. So thank you very much. And also I have to point out that what Magnus and Matti were mentioning, we definitely see a lot of the similar issues and trends. So thank you so much.
Okay, excellent. Well, we've obviously seen some very cool initiatives, large scale, good cost efficiency, a lot of participants into the project itself. We see that pricing is quite good, that even a few years ago, many of our panelists have described that, renewable energy can be at a price point without any supporting subsidies. And even the most recent spikes in energy prices have really increased the demand. And we deal with some of this counter pressure to immediately deal with rising prices with coal and more traditional energy sources. Let's go first here to a question from Anna, and talking about material supplies issue. And it says that problems are also connected, that the mining industry is facing permitting challenges all over the world. So starting new mines, I guess, is that they won't be able to provide materials needed. How do you see the solution of environmentally challenging mining industry, permitting issues, and the supply of future of the energy transition? And I just want to mention here, it's like many mining companies, in effect, are going into recycling. Rio Tinto spend more money on recycling aluminum than they do in developing new mines. I just wanted to throw that in as a provocative thought. So I guess, Matti, this question is directed to you, but anybody else, if they would like to weigh in.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question, and I think it's definitely a good one. I think the challenge is really finding the path for the next decades that is, on the balance, the most environmentally sustainable and to an extent also economically viable. And I think definitely you mentioned the challenges on the mining side. We agree on that. But at the same time, the materials do need to come from somewhere, and they need to enable that, because I guess the alternative is that you stick around with fossil fuels for longer. And if you look at the CO2 balance, the environmental impact balance, I think it's really a tough challenge, but I think it's really, you need to find some form of golden mean in between that really balances both the risks on the mining side and the fossil emissions. So it's a tough question. I'm not sure if other participants have a view on that.
Well, I know that in my younger days, when I was first year, I was involved in mining, and we were looking at setting up power lines for electric shovels. So electricity to to power, the heavy equipment to basically mine ore. So maybe as renewable energy becomes more widespread, this would be more pervasive, as obviously sometimes mines are in difficult areas. So maybe the opportunity for more modular installations that would allow power sources for certain phases of mine construction could be an idea. But I've been out of that market for some time, but maybe somebody else has some thoughts. Okay, we have a question here for Altenai. Has Triodos already made equity investments in renewable energy projects? And can you give some examples? Jan is asking this question. Over to you, Altenai.
Jan, thank you very much for the question. Actually, what we do is mainly we do senior debt in our team, and mezzanine finance we can also do, but we also cooperate a lot with the funds. And the funds, such as, for example, Climate Investor One in the Netherlands, we do take equity stakes in those. So it's not on the not on the project by project basis, but in the funds. I hope that answers.
Okay. Any other questions? In the meantime, as questions are popping up, our time is almost up. So I want to give everybody 30 seconds, right? I want to hear the punchline. Basically, 4 countries for a project to develop. What's your top 2 pieces of advice for the developer in renewable energy projects? 2 things they should consider as valuable pieces of advice. Altenai, over to you first, because you were last in presenting.
Well, I would say I think look at the tariffs. Tariffs is everything. How competitive they are. Yeah, and the second one is in general what we see is also like there are lots of issues with permitting. Sometimes EPC changes. So on that side,
Contractual side there. Yeah. Okay.
strong
Excellent.
advisors is very important as well.
Excellent.
LPA
Thank you. Thank you, Altenai. Matti, over to you. Top 2 pieces of advice.
Yeah, I think the top 2 that come to mind are sort of one is partner up, and the second is do your homework. I think on the partnering up, I think it's really critical to have really the local and the international perspective. You need to know the country, you need to know the people, you need to know what's happening on the ground, but at the same time bringing some international expertise that understands how the sort of larger construction companies and financiers work. And that sort of partnering up is crucial, I think, to make the projects happen. I think the do your homework part is really to do everything thoroughly from the start. And I think that's part of the things that helps the project get realized at a faster timeline.
Yeah, well, failing to plan is planning to fail, right? Magnus, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll also share then in capacity having been in the DFI world and different IPPs. I mean, I think communication is very critical, and I mean realistic communication. So any local developer need to engage with some international party very often, at least, and very often communication can be, say, over sold. So, I mean, you're overselling a project, you're hiding things. It's always better to be just very transparent and upfront. And I think
so no surprises is important.
Exactly. And I think secondly, what I've seen being maybe one of the key differences are what do actually those international DFI, FDI providers expect from that local party. That discrepancy is often very large. And for example, environmental and social expectations is one very classical example here.
Hurdle, yeah. Thank you very much, Magnus. Bella, over to you for final words. From Armenia, what's the 2 pieces of advice?
I think my advice would very much repeat Maddie's advice, to be honest, because what we've seen from our experience is having an institutional partner who is very much aware of the international processes and of the process of implementing such industrial scale project is very important. And again, planning for all the steps, starting from, I don't know, the project documentation till and bringing the project till its end.
To completion. Yeah. Thank you very much. Well, as you can see, the wisdom that we have in this panel is tremendous. Renewable energy seems to be on, the upward swing. And I think that through our partnerships and connections, we can build better, faster. So I thank all of our partners here today. And I imagine that you'll be communicating with many of them as you develop renewable energy projects in your region. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you all. I think it was a very nice